Hi folks, welcome to episode 7 of The Hole on the Corner, where we talk all things R.A. Lafferty. We're banging our way through the short story collections, and we're going to get to the unpublished or uncollected short stories in this unscripted freewheeling chat about it all. And I meant to say in the first video on the short stories that I am going slower through these because I want to stop and smell the interstitial roses and other aromatic flora, because it gives us a chance to start to actually talk about Lafferty's short fiction a little bit if we kind of go through it at this pace. But I am still trying to get through more quickly than slowly. Anyway, so as I said in the last one, we've come to the end of Lafferty's stories being collected in a mass market way, very sadly, and the last outing was kind of poor, I thought. So we start coming to specialty presses, and in 1982, Corroboree Press from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I don't know the story behind this, who these guys are, or why they wanted to do this, put out two really nice specialty collections. I haven't lost the dust jacket. They don't have one. This little signature on the front. And the first one is called Golden Gate and Other Stories. I believe my copy has an autograph, a signature from Lafferty, number 756 out of 1,000. It's cool. I've never been that into signatures or autographs, so I'm really sorry if you wish you had this. It's a little bit wasted on me, but there you go. It's pretty cool. If you want to pay me enough for this that I could actually afford to buy the remaining set of the Centipede Press when it comes out, I would consider giving it to you. But other than that, I want to keep it. And I don't think anybody wants it that bad for that kind of price. Anyway, these are quite lovely. I really like to read a smaller book. I like mass market paperbacks for that reason. And I prefer softbacks over hardbacks overall. But that said, cool, this is nice. Yeah, the print's pretty good, but I prefer to read in a slightly different manner than this. That said, it has illustrations. It has paintings and illustrations, in most all of which are really cool. And they do this thing that also I showed was in, like, what was it? Not The Flame is Green, but the next one in the Coscoan Chronicles, Half a Sky, had these things. I've never seen this kind of thing before, where you have like a painting or whatever, illustration of some sort that's like glued on at the top, and it's like this little piece. It seems unwieldy, and I can't believe I haven't destroyed them yet, but so they're sturdier than they seem, but it's quite lovely. There's something about that. Whatever, I don't know what that's about. There's probably a name for it. So that's the illustration for Golden Gate, which is a good story, maybe a great story, and it's another one I need to revisit. Its start massively grabbed me, and then it sort of lost me. I mean, I could finish it and it's fun, but it has this sort of, I don't know if it's a 19th century setting or early 20th. It's all about a sort of vaudeville, or what's the other term? But like a vaudeville sort of theater that people attend. And that could be a lot more fun to me than I think this story is, that sort of setting, whatever. But it's, I guess maybe the devil is a character in it somehow, which is often the case with Lafferty. Anyway, but this intro is one of the best things, Lafferty ever wrote. It gets quoted a lot, but when you have shot and killed a man, you have in some measure clarified your attitude toward him. You have given a definite answer to a definite problem. For better or worse, you have acted decisively. In a way, the next move is up to him. I don't know. I love it. A lot of people love it. So that's Golden Gate. Next comes Mr. Hamadryad. All right, now, so I'm not sure what I think about this as an overall collection in terms of the table of contents. I think there's still these 70 stories that aren't getting collected, that could fire a little more on the page and fit better in a collection to really make it like, whoa. These are all great stories, but just the way they're stuck together. You know, people don't seem to understand my thing about table of contents. When I've talked to people online, especially about Lafferty's table of contents, that there is a way to set stories together where they kind of flow in and out of each other, and keep in mind the type of story you've just read. So the kind of thing you maybe need a break, or you need things can flow. It's like making a playlist. To me, it seems like, of course, of course you can think about the order and like craft something just lovely. I don't understand how you would not think that, but because some of the tables of contents, especially in this newer stuff, seems quite random. Anyway, I think this one kind of gets clunked up a bit. But anyway, let me see. These are from, oh, I wish it said the dates in order. I'm trying to find Golden Gate. Right, okay, so Golden Gate is 82. A number of stories: One-Eyed Mockingbird, This Boating Itch, Tongues of the Matagorda, Marsilia 5, Golden Gate, and Make Sure the Eyes Are Big Enough all appear in this anthology for the first time. But that doesn't mean they were written in 82 or 80 or 81. They could be from all over Lafferty's career. Andrew Ferguson would know. And he may have talked about some of these on his blog, Continued on Next Rock. So Mr. Hamadryad is from 1974. And it's one I've never heard of. It's published in Stellar one. And it's not top tier Lafferty, I think, just because, I don't know, it's hard to say why that's the case sometimes. And I never can find the right words. I start to say something like clunky, but that's not it. It's fine in that way, but it just, yeah, there's a way that some of his stories like sing or flash or whatever, or, you know, more quietly produce something lovely and profound or whatever. And, you know, some of his stories just don't quite reach that. And there's stories that don't meet the mark that still are awesome, you know. And then there's ones that are really cool, you know. And this is like the really cool kind, but it does some unique stuff that he doesn't do elsewhere. Here's the illustration for it. Which does give you an idea what the story is like and what it's about. There is a guy that is kind of described as looking like that. And it's basically like, Lafferty loves the whole idea of like saying that this epoch has changed and switched over, and this thing held power, and now this thing holds power. And this is like between, I think, cats and baboons or something. The cat and baboon people or whatever kind of rule the world. And Mr. Hamadryad is, I think, of the baboon people. And there's this, he does really cool, weird stuff about people's sort of presence and footsteps arriving just before them. And awesome, he describes these cocktails each time in like almost this ritualistic manner. And it's like Easter Island statues and stuff, and God's thumbprint coming down over an island or something is pretty awesome. And it's cool, man. It's a weird, very weird story. Would almost fit in like a weird fiction anthology or something. This Boating Itch also would almost fit in a weird fiction sort of anthology. And this is, again, like not quite top tier Lafferty to me for various reasons, and but is even more exciting. I love Mr. Hamadryad. I think this one just packs even more of a punch, where I can't remember all the details, but it eventually, people have this itch on, I think, their left hands, and eventually they feel compelled to chop off their hands, and then the hands start crawling around. So very cool. So the next story, I think, is Condillac's Statue, or Wrens in His Head. That is the title. The or is part of the title. I think it's just called Condillac's Statue here, but when it first came out, it was called Condillac's Statue, or Wrens in His Head. I like that, you know, W-R-E-N. Oh, no, it does have the subtitle here. And this is kind of a low-level fave of mine. It's set in France, 19th century France, and I think right before the main revolution there, maybe. And it's about a statue that a couple of philosophers and at least one of them is a real philosopher, Condillac, I think, who had certain ideas and stuff. And they basically kind of wonder about what's innate in a human mind and what comes through impressions, and they just, for no given reason, it's kind of magical realism-ish, imbue this statue with the ability to start taking in senses, and it slowly does it. And there's this long passage, this is one of my all-time favorite Lafferty bits, where it describes everything he smells in the sort of French countryside. I'm going to read it. It's a huge paragraph. Lathered horses, foam-whitened harness, green goop in the horse trough. Those were smells of the little park and the big country. Wet flintstones, grackle birds, and the mites on them. River grass and marl grass and loam grass. Oaks and chestnuts. Wagon wheel grease, men in leather. Stone in shade and stone in sun. Hot mules, and they do not smell the same as hot horses. Mice in the grass roots. Muskiness of snakes. Sharpness of fox hair. Air of badger holes. Brown dust of the Orleans road. Red dust of the road to Chateaudun. Crows that have fed today and those who have not. Time-polished coach wood. Turtles eating low grapes, and the grapes being bruised and eaten. Sheep and goats. Cows in milk. New stilted colts. Long loaves, corks of wine bottles, cicadas and pigweeds. Hands of smiths and feet of charcoal burners. Wetted iron on travelers. Pungent blouses of rivermen. Oat cakes and sour cream. Wooden shoes, goose eggs, new spread dung, potato bugs, thatchers at work, clover, vetch, hairy legs of bumblebees. There are no two of these things that have the same smell. The kids said that the statue could smell even with a stone nose. He stood and smelled for a month, and the smells informed his stone. Woo! Maybe just other people are like, what? A big list of countryside things or something? And he's supposed to, but like it's just a lovely list to me. I think he writes literary lists. They're about exuberance. They fit with this philosophy called object-oriented ontology that I study that's all about lists, or partly all about lists. But the types of things he smells, that's Lafferty, man. That's not only is the exuberant list unique to Lafferty in a lot of ways, not completely, but this, the types of things he smells, like stones in shade and stones in sun, sharpness, not of foxes, but fox hair, turtles eating low grapes, and the grapes being bruised and eaten, like that's its own smell, and so on and so on. And the hairy legs of bumblebees. That's not the only time Lafferty uses that line. Let me tell you, he likes the hairy legs of bumblebees. And he likes to focus in on tiny things like that as well as grander things. And it's just so ecological and this kind of thing. So here's the painting for that one. Don't like this as much as some of the others, but not bad. So that's a good story. One of my favorites, just for some things like that more than anything else. The Cliff Climbers is a really good story about a spire in Middle America, Western America. I can't remember if it actually says specifically, but Southwestern, a natural formation that people climb and write things, and somebody's trying to translate something that somebody wrote a long, long time ago. It's very poetic. And kind of has a poignancy to it, and again has this ecological feel. Magruder's Marvels, I think I mentioned before, about miniature, but I didn't say what it was about. It's about miniature. It's about like a flea circus, I think, and miniature stuff. And Lafferty does miniature stuff just really, really cool. And it's I don't know. I think it's a little bit more of a minor study, but story, but quite a fun one. I don't think it's all that science fictional or fantastical. It's it's just an American yarn. Maybe. Tongues of the Matagorda is an excerpt from an unpublished novel, Esteban, which is about an African man and a Spanish man. I can't remember who were the first people to explore. I think the African was his slave, to explore inner America back in, I don't know when, but hundreds of years ago, but way back. And there's some interaction with Native Americans and things. I haven't read the whole thing. I got to sort of sample it in the archive. I think it's quite good, at least in a lot of ways. It may be comparable to Oklahanali, but different, so maybe not. But maybe a great historical work by Lafferty, but with some tall tale aspects. And so here's one part. I don't know how to explain it, but they're various characters needing to tell stories, I think to keep from getting their tongues cut out, but they call the stories tongues, and each one tells a tongue, and they get progressively more tall and awesome, and eventually some Native American characters tell some of their stories, which are really awesome, about hunting deer and then I think sort of being hunted by the deer. And there's this cool little, there's a drought, it's like Gulf of Mexico, and there's these armadillos that kind of lead them to water or something. That's a really great story. I think it's hard to, I think it does work on its own, but hard to place what it is or what it's doing exactly. But I think that is kind of a top tier story. The storytelling in it, the tall tales, the myths or whatever, are really pretty top notch. Lafferty. Ishmael into the Barrens, I think actually is collected somewhere else. Some of these, so now there becomes like a lot of overlap with stuff that's been published. If you get a collection by Lafferty, there's a good chance some of the stories are in another collection by Lafferty. Anyway, Ishmael into the Barrens is infamously Lafferty's sort of anti-hippie story where he makes fun of old hippies and stuff, and it's kind of a pro-life story. He's Catholic, conservative Catholic in a lot of ways, and Lafferty could have a persecution complex. Let's just be frank about it. And it uncomfortably reminds me of things going on now. But he really felt beleaguered by this, and I think it blinkered him as to how he portrayed his ideological enemies sometimes. That said, this story doesn't really disgust me or something. It's still got a lot of awesome things to say. It is, to me, it's almost a novella. I don't know how many people really go for it, but it's a great little dystopian sort of sci-fi adventure story that has a lot of cool things going on. Has this part where it breaks down in the middle and talks about scatterprint and sort of scattered narratology, and the story has to be told that way and all these things. And it has this amazing, right in the midst, this often happens where you see Lafferty being conservative about something, you'll then see him be really liberal about something, and he has this beautiful bit in the middle where the current Pope is praying to God, and he's sort of like in a desert or something. He's like, often Lafferty has the church, so diminished in power that it's practically an underground movement. Not that maybe hasn't happened historically or how the Christianity started or something. There's a lot to think about there. I'm not just like, it's not just like a blanket condemnation toward that kind of stuff. But anyway, the Pope is praying, and it's a beautiful prayer, and I think that he gets a little sign from God or something. But he prays about the church becoming a shelter to other monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, and Protestantism, which like kind of thinks of as almost another religion or whatever, and there's just a generosity of spirit to it that is lovely, and it seems that he was quite sincere, so much so that I've seen some hardcore conservative Catholics be like, I don't know what Lafferty was doing there, and I know that still sets up a hierarchy amongst those religions and doesn't say anything about other kinds of religions. But, for what it is within its limited scope, I find it a really beautiful little passage and suggestive of things. And there's action adventure. These no-thoi hunters are hunting down anybody that gets pregnant. Okay, you know. But yeah, here's the. Actually, am I still on Ishmael into the Barrens? Yes. Yeah. So like, I don't know. Looks like from the illustration, it kind of looks like rock and roll killers against punk rock kids or something. I don't know. Not quite what's going on, but it does have a bit of that feel, like almost like a cyberpunk-ish sort of feel, almost, you know, even though it's not necessarily about sort of technology or whatever. Anyway, Urima's Dam is in here, and I think in some other places. It's a cool story about invention. The mother of invention is stupidity, and this boy who is so stupid that he keeps inventing machines to like do his homework and do all kinds of other stuff, which is, you know, a funny little irony or whatever. And doesn't get along, you know, I don't know. It's robots and different things. It's got a mythic undercurrent that's quite cool. It's pretty up there. It does some really, really cool stuff. It won the, I believe, Hugo Award. What are the two awards? Hugo and Nebula. So I think it won, the Hugo Award. And it was the only story that Lafferty ever won that award. And he didn't get why they chose that story. He's like, I had better stories you could have chose to give me a Hugo for. And I agree with him so hard, you know. And there's apparently a story where one of his better stories was up the year before nominated. He got nominated a fair bit. And it lost out to some really classic science fiction story, kind of rightly so. But they were so bummed out they couldn't finally give Lafferty a Hugo that they kind of nudged him up to get it the next time just on whatever story, and this was it. So, yeah. Anyway, the next story is one of the greatest stories by Lafferty of all time, Days of Grass, Days of Straw, also collected elsewhere, and thankfully was included in the new Very Best of R.A. Lafferty. And I don't know how to describe it, but it's a sort of one world overlaid on another world, and the interaction between, meaning like sort of layers of reality, not like planets or something, but it's, you know, a guy's walking to work and then everything becomes like a sort of 19th century Native American village as he's walking to work with through tall grass and stuff. And it's really funny and cool in that part. But then it becomes like this thing where the mountain is lifted off the ground and all these prophets are wrestling with God underneath this mountain that is raised, or up on the mountain. They're getting thrown down and it's all bloody. And but they're creating a day of grass. We've been living in days of straw. They're creating a day of grass where there's like a rich renewal of like life and like, you know, awesomeness, which includes a bunch of like sort of grotesquerie and violence. Mainly, it used to be one of my sort of favorite sort of Native American type stories that Lafferty did. I call his style, when he does really weird, kind of Native American based or more Oklahoma or Southwestern or bioregional based weird fiction, I call it buffalo punk, because it's quite different than like cow punk or some kind of Western punk. It's more rooted in an alternative vein of that, I think. And this used to be one of my favorites, but now, and it still has some, it's one of my favorite stories by far, but I'm just not sure what I think about his engagement with Native Americans in it. Some of it I think is super cool. But there's this awesome part where the Native Americans fight the bison for some reason. Well, it's for fun, for the bison and the Native Americans. And they tie their spears to the bison's horns to give them even more advantage, and they just like slaughter each other on the field and have a blast. It's almost like like a Native American Valhalla or something. And then other things, and there's some really like, there's these like college professors or something, as often happens in Lafferty, having some really technical talk about sort of multi-layered reality, basically. So there's a lot of ontological stuff as usual with Lafferty, but gruesomeness and funniness. And there's this cool thing about like the whole idea of like praying, and he again widens it out beyond, you know, conservative sort of Christian theology, and talks about mainly Native Americans, but sort of having their own sort of version of scriptures and prayer and different stuff. And he does this great thing with St. Paul's comment, I think it's in his letter to the Philippians, about work out your salvation with fear and trembling, which is almost like just a saying now, not like widely used, but maybe somewhat known. And he says it's been mistranslated, and he has fun with like playing around with etymology and stuff. And he says that it's working out your salvation with kind of fear and laughter, fear shaking and laughter shaking, fear trembling and laughter trembling. And that is such a key to all of Lafferty's work. It's this, I call it a horror comic mode. It's not horror comedy like the genre or whatever of like films or whatever. It could, have some of those qualities. But again, as I've said before, it's not just like comedy fiction or humor fiction or something. There's more going on that, but it is very funny. But I call it a horror comic mode because it kind of fuses horror and comedy in a sort of higher sense. And it has that laughter and that trembling that comes from both laughter and being scared, or like frisson, and that really gets to the heart of what Lafferty's doing in his fiction and his worldview and all kinds of things. And it's a pretty awe-inspiring, kind of mind-bending sort of story. Very cool. Days of Grass, Days of Straw. Make Sure the Eyes Are Big Enough, I'd never heard of till this anthology. I love this story. Maybe slightly minor or second tier, but like the conceit is top tier and one of my favorite things. Here's the pretty wild art for it. And I think it has to do with this chewing gum that enables people to now take in the 900% of the world that they've been phasing out. And they start to see all kinds of other beings, basically. And I think, like weird monster-y type people and all kinds of stuff, and little and big things. And I think some like flora as well as fauna that like coexist with us on levels that we can't usually see or perceive in any way. It's very cool. Yeah. And, I think you can kind of tell in some ways what that's about. Bequest of Wings. I'm going to come back to this because one thing I noticed about this anthology, going back through it, that I hadn't noticed before, Fall of Pebblestones, I think is collected elsewhere. Cool little tall tale about pebblestones collecting under windowsills. I didn't like as much the first time, liked it more the second time. It's a pretty cool story. Marsilia 5, or Marsilia V, actually, I think, is a war tale. Lafferty did very little of that from his time in World War II, and it has kind of a gruesome ending that people find objectionable because it's about the non-whites that they're fighting that suffer. But I didn't sense that Lafferty thought that was a great thing or something, so I don't know that I find it objectionable on that level. But it's a very cool, it's got like quite an ecological thing about it, and it's a pretty cool little war story, really. And it's about like a sensitive man who's forced to kind of do war, basically. Anyway, yeah, One-Eyed Mockingbird I need to read again. I remember being pretty wowed by this weird central conceit that kind of messed with size and different stuff. Here's the awesome weird illustration. I need to go back and figure out what the hell that one's about. I love it. And then Sky is where it ends with this really rad illustration. I'm going to go back and show you the Quest of Wings illustration. But I noticed that this, like I said, Ishmael into the Barrens, allegedly an anti-hippie story, is, in a way. Let me just say that Lafferty, the thing about Lafferty with his ideological enemies, okay, and that whole thing there, okay, is that for me, whilst sometimes Lafferty gives a feel that goes to a place that I don't like, and I don't think is fair, he doesn't fairly represent other people sometimes. For every moment that he does that, he's going the opposite direction as well, and being generous and liberal-hearted. And so, if anything, that makes him super interesting to me as a human, as an artist, because there's a pull in him toward these different ends, and it's something we can sink our teeth into, something we should be able to appreciate. I mean, who amongst us, is not struggling with that kind of pull in our hearts about things like that, especially in our contemporary situation. So yeah, so there's several other stories in here too, quite a few. Urima's Dam actually kind of gets into this too, where he critiques like youth culture a lot in his way, usually in funny ways, and you know, it always kind of works as a story and does cool things. So it's never like just this, like, you know, that's all it's all about or whatever. But they put a lot of those stories together in here, and other sort of cultural critiques that he had that were, you know, why he called himself the cranky old man from Tulsa, you know. But what I noticed is that if you collect those together, you do actually see a little more of Lafferty's compassion, really. He has a lot of compassion, actually, and I know that can be a weapon, you know, weaponized compassion and stuff, but okay, so he has that, and then particularly, so there's this story, Sky, where he critiques, you know, recreational drug use, again, as I've mentioned before with some stories. This is a very good one, I think. Slightly uneven in some respects with the story, but pretty near top tier for me, and just like what it does with the mind. Because it basically describes these, well, it's like, it's got this awesome thing about the furtive fox. The sky seller was Mr. Furtive himself, fox-muzzled, ferret-eyed, slithering along like a snake and living under the rocks. That's the first line. And it's really cool. It talks about him going underground and picking spores and stuff. And he's the drug dealer. He's giving people shrooms or whatever, and Lafferty doesn't like him. But his caricature of him is super cool. And he describes these young people tripping, basically. And it's like a cautionary tale because it ends really gruesomely and bad. And they basically think that they're flying. You know, it's called Sky. That's the drug. And I guess they do end up flying and brutally dying. That is described really well and brutally. Make of that what you will. But the problem, he's so good at describing trippy stuff. Like his stuff is just trippy anyway. You know, and I think he's drawing on all kinds of sources to get that, you know, everything from his own, like, drinking to, like, a bunch of esoteric thought and theology and vision literature from saints and nuns and what have you. So he's got a lot to draw on to arrive at a pretty similar place to psychedelics, I think. And I used to say, when people would say, he's psychedelic, he's trippy, I'd be, no, he's not. He's against all that, and he does something so much better. Now, I've since realized there's a whole strain. I was basing all that on a very limited idea of what psychedelic art and, you know, music and stuff is. And I've realized there's just so much more out there that's different expressions of that kind of thing that is diverse, for starters, and to me good. I just, you know, find some, you know, like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, I'm sorry, is just cheesy as hell to me. It's a great little kick in. And I can understand how it must have been like when you first heard it back in the 60s. Strawberry Fields, I think, is a better example. I think they do better on that one with that sort of trippy vibe. But Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, like, well, and there's so much stuff like that just, and sitars, and oh, you know, I'm so sorry, but it's just not my thing. Fine, if it's your thing, cool. But there's just more to psychedelic. And you know, great example to me, again, I've mentioned Beach Boys, can't help it. It's my current obsession. But Brian Wilson's unfinished album, Smile, is a great alternative expression of psychedelia. And I think that Lafferty kind of fits in with that alt psych, if you like, you know. Anyway, but when he's even critiquing it, he just does such a good job talking about it. It's like they're having this trip. He's described like quite a few things like this. And he says, not monotony, no, presentation, living sets, scenery. The scenes were formed for the splinter of a moment, or they were formed forever. Whole worlds formed in a pregnant void, not spherical worlds merely, but dodecaspherical, and those much more intricate than that. Not merely 7 colors to play with, but 7 to the 7th, and to the 7th again. Stars vivid in the bright light. You who have seen stars only in the darkness, be silent. Asteroids that they ate like peanuts, for now they were all metamorphic giants. Galaxies like herds of rampaging elephants. Bridges so long that both ends of them receded over the light speed edges. Waterfalls of a finer water that bounced off galaxy clusters as if they were boulders. And so on, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, again, bro, I'm not sure you're making the point you think you're making, you know, like that sounds amazing. And it's not really differentiated from when Lafferty is writing a similar sort of vision literature from the perspective that he approves of, with characters having visions, or just the story itself is visionary. And so I do think part of what it is that he understands why people gravitate toward that and what they're getting out of it. He thinks there's a better fountain for it, and that fountain is a big recurring symbol for him. Okay, and fair enough. You can say that. You can have that debate and that argument. But there's a kinship between what he does and some of the things he critiques. But more importantly, this collection contains one of my all-time favorite stories by Lafferty. It is very much a top-tier story. Its artistry as writing is not, as tight and focused as some of this stuff, but I put some of that kind of really experimental stuff that doesn't entirely work at the writerly level up in the top tier because of the kind of weirdness that it achieves. And sometimes it needs to be that. He can't get as weird if he's not kind of barely contained, And in this story, it's another critique of youth culture. And in this case, the youth are becoming mutants. They're mutating. And their fingers and arms are extending, getting very long, so that essentially they become like bat-like. And they don't have wings, but they construct wings to go over this, and they all fly up in the sky and hang out at a youth hangout up in the sky. And there's a dad and a mom who is cranky about his teenage kids, and they're flying about and whatever. And it's more Laffertian than I'm making it sound, because that almost sounds like some old sci-fi story or something. There's more of a resonance to it. But anyway, and in this character, you can see it's so beautiful. Like, I think the wife maybe says some things to suggest, like, you were like that when you were young or whatever. But you see the beginnings of an understanding between the generations, and a softening of that cranky old attitude, and a more of a, maybe I need to listen to you guys more or something type of thing. But here's the artwork from that, which is super fun to me. Anyway, that is Golden Gate and Other Stories by R.A. Lafferty from Corroboree Press. And we're going to have to get into their next one next time. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, I am going to try to speed these up. I just keep getting bogged down with a few particular things I want to say, but I don't think I have too much of that kind of thing left to do. So I think we'll be able to finish up the collected fiction soon, or at least the old collected fiction. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you guys next time.